outgrowth of what started in 2019 in California, where you had that Assembly Bill 5 get pushed through into law. And it was based on this language called the ABC test, which I know you've talked a lot about on your show. It's a 3-factor test, A, B, C, and they changed it in a way that made it almost impossible for anybody to pass the B prong in particular, that said, if you're in the same line of business as whoever's hiring you, you can no longer be an independent contractor. You have to be an employee. And the stated goal by the people who passed it, every article that came out about it, it was all that we're going to make all these freelancers, independent contractors, consultants, they're all going to become employees now, and then they can be in unions and their lives will be better. That was the goal. It was a bill intended to help unions with their historically low membership numbers. And that was the promise. And as we all know, because I know you've talked about it on the show, not what actually happened. What actually happened in California with that anti-independent contractor law was independent contractors just losing money and losing clients, and in some cases losing careers. And it happened to all kinds of people: financial advisors, court reporters, graphic designers, translators, interpreters. You all saw very in-depth, I know you've talked about the battle against Uber and Lyft that the state tried with AB5. It was mad.
Non-profits.
Yeah. Oh, it was so many professions that less than a year later, the state of California had to go back and pass an emergency measure. They ultimately exempted, at least partially, more than 100 professions from this ABC test. And as I know your listeners are all well aware, right after that, Prop22 came through, and the voters, by a margin of just about 60-40, said, yeah, we're going to exempt those folks too, the rideshare drivers. And this is all stupid, and stop what you're doing, lawmakers. Nobody wants this. Nobody thinks this is a good idea. Horrible. So that happened in California. Right after that ABC test law went through in California, kind of around the rest of the country, we were looking at it and going, wow, those crazy Californians, what are they doing out there? I don't understand. Sucks to be them. Glad I don't live there. This is weird. But immediately after that ABC test law went through in California, there were copycat bills introduced in other blue states, including my state, New Jersey. There was another one introduced in New York, and all of a sudden you started seeing in the press in Illinois, they were going to introduce one there. And it very quickly became clear that the California ABC test bill was supposed to be the start of a national rollout of this policy that was going to be the biggest reclassification of independent contractors and employees pretty much in history of the country. They wanted to reshape the workforce. And so what you saw happen, because of all the problems in California, you saw people like us kind of started being real big mouths in the press and whatnot out in New Jersey. That scared the New Jersey lawmakers enough that they couldn't get that copycat bill through. The lawmakers in New York saw what was happening in California. They saw everybody screaming in New Jersey. They said, well, maybe we'll think about this a little longer. And they pulled back on what they were doing. Illinois saw what was happening and said, yeah, I don't even think we're going to introduce the bill right now. It all just kind of, everybody retreated to their corner and was like staring over the fence at each other, like what's going to happen next? At which point, this same ABC test from California all of a sudden showed up in a federal bill called the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, the ProAct. It was placed right on page 1. And the ProAct, it's a version of what they did in California. It would only affect one area of federal law, but it's kind of like in a war, first you got to take the beach and then you can move your troops inland and get more land. They're trying to find a way to take the beach. They first thought they could take the beach by going state by state and getting it through. That was how they were going to get their foothold so they could advance their plan. When that failed, they decided to try with this federal bill. And what happened with the federal bill, it passed the U.S. House and then didn't go anywhere because at the time Donald Trump was the president and he said, yeah, I'm not passing this. There was no chance of it going. But very soon after that, we had the elections in 2020. And as we all know, the Democrats took control of the U.S. House of Representatives, the U.S. Senate, and the White House. So now all of a sudden they could get it through if they wanted to. And they immediately passed it again, almost immediately, in the U.S. House. It went to the U.S. Senate, where 3 moderate Democrats stood up and said no. They said, we saw what happened in California. 2 of them went on the record. Senator Mark Warner in Virginia and Senator Mark Kelly in Arizona went on the record and said, we don't like this part about the independent contractors. We're seeing what happened in California. People don't like this. People don't want this. It's not working out. So they couldn't get the people who want this, who want to reclassify huge swaths of independent contractors as employees. Now they've failed at the legislative level in most of the states. They've tried. Now they're blocked in the legislative branch of government at the federal level too. That gets us to where we are now, because now they're trying to find other ways to get to make happen what they want to happen. So with the legislative path blocked, they're moving to the executive branch of government, right? You got 3 branches of government, right? You got the courts, you got the legislatures, and you've got the executive branch. Executive branch at the federal level, that's the White House and all the agencies they control, like the Treasury Department, the Commerce Department, the Defense Department. In this case, what's happening now is with the Labor Department. They're going to try to do a bit of an end run to get as close as they can to what they really wanted through some rulemaking at the Labor Department. Are you with me so far?
Yeah, I am. Is everybody else with us so far?
It's a lot, right? So
there's more to take. There's more to swallow here, guys. So stay tuned.
So you got to first understand who is actually doing this in the Labor Department. What happened when President Biden came in was he, like most presidents do, started filling these departments with people he wanted in the leadership so he could get the policies he wanted through. In the Labor Department, he installed Labor Secretary Marty Walsh, who before he became a public official was a union organizer. Under Marty Walsh, he brought in Julie Su, a name people might recognize in California because she was a public official there who was involved with AB5 and telling Uber and Lyft drivers to apply for unemployment to see if they were misclassified and that kind of thing. Under her, they brought in a woman named Nikki McKinney into the Labor Department. Nikki McKinney was the one, prior to that, if you had scheduled a meeting to talk with the senator who was the primary sponsor of the ProAct in the United States Senate, Nikki McKinney is the one you got the meeting with. She was the one writing the ABC test into page 1 of the bill. She's the one we did a phone meeting with where we explained to her that our best case scenario with that ABC test was we went from having a business with 30 or 35 clients to overnight having 30 or 35 part-time bosses, which to normal people sounds crazy, but she said, yeah, I see no problem with that. So this is the people now in the Labor Department who are going to try to advance this cause. They're still trying to take the beach, right, in the battle. And now they're going to try to do it with rulemaking. So these people came in to the Labor Department, and the first thing they did was try to get rid of the existing rule that the Labor Department uses to determine who's an employee and who's an independent contractor. And you have to understand where that rule came from. It's weird, but up until the Trump administration, there wasn't actually a rule in place at the U.S. Labor Department to determine independent contractor versus employee. They kind of looked at what the courts were doing and went with that. But when the labor secretary under President Trump, his name was Eugene Scalia. He's the son of Supreme Court Justice Scalia. When Labor Secretary Eugene Scalia saw what was going on with AB5 and everything in the states, and he said, well, we're going to make an actual rule. The Obama administration before that had done like a big, long guidance note where they said, yeah, we're going to try to crack down on some of this misclassification and people who should really be employees. But the Trump administration Labor Department, they came in and said, no, we're going to make an actual rule. And so at the end of the Trump administration, the Labor Department actually implemented a rule that legitimate independent contractors can pass. It's not like AB5. And in fact, when he implemented it, Secretary Scalia wrote, we see what's happening with AB5, and we don't want to broadly redefine who independent contractors are. We think that's wrong. We want to just have a test that is reasonable and that legitimate freelancers and independent contractors can pass. So that was what was in place when Joe Biden started restacking the Labor Department with all these folks who really very much wanted the ABC test. All that makes sense so far? Good. Keep going. Okay. I see you saying yes. I can't hear you, but okay. I think you're muted maybe. So
I was muting to make sure that you were heard, but yes, I'm
you're with
following.
me.
As long as I don't see anything in the chat saying that anybody else is confused. So far, so good though.
We're good. Okay. So now you've got these folks in the Labor Department. The first thing they try to do is get rid of the rule that the Trump administration had put in. And their first try didn't go so well. The courts slapped them and basically said, you did this wrong. You didn't follow the rules you're supposed to follow when you change a rule like this. And so you have to go back to the Trump rule. So that was their first try. And now we're on their second try. So they just recently dropped. They announced, okay, well, we're just going to make a new rule. They've been going through the process of doing this. They started by doing public hearings over the summer. They were done on Zoom. Right from the get-go, they announced 2 public hearings, one for employers and one for workers. They did not announce one for actual independent contractors. So right out of the gate, you understand who these people are and where they're coming from. Those public hearings were so overrun by actual independent contractors screaming no that they had to break them into multiple meetings sometimes, and still people were waiting to talk and didn't get a chance to talk. You know, the ratio was like, I don't know, 10 independent contractors for every one person who wanted to do this, maybe not even that many. It was just a deluge of angry independent contractors in those public hearings. They failed to record those public hearings. So in one of the hearings, they told people who were participating that they couldn't record them either. The whole thing was all just very clearly meant to be a puppet theater show. The next thing that happened was they did invitation-only meetings to discuss how they were going to write the rule. And it does become a matter of public information who they held those meetings with. Again, independent contractors nowhere at the table to be found. They had a couple meetings with some representatives from like the financial services industry, the construction industry, like more higher level association kind of people. And then they had a bunch of meetings with people like, there was one whole meeting for union organizers trying to organize rideshare drivers. There was one whole meeting held for the National Employment Law Project people. That is a think tank that is union funded, and the president of its board of directors is the head of the AFL-CIO. So you can see who's writing this rule and what it's all the same people now just moving over into the Labor Department who'd been trying to do this through legislation. What they eventually dropped was a 184-page monstrosity of a proposed rule, which I do not recommend anyone read unless you have insomnia or you are interested in like becoming an alcoholic, because you just can't even, it breaks your brain going through it. But I have read through it. And what they did was they said one thing and then they did another thing. What they said is, we can't do the ABC. We love the ABC test. We think the ABC test is great, but we don't think we can do that without an act of Congress or a ruling by the US Supreme Court. We think it would exceed our authority to do that. And they are correct in my opinion. So that was a relief that they didn't try to overshoot it that way. But what they said they're going to do is, we're just going to go back to the way things were in the Obama administration. And we're going to use this 6-factor test, which unlike ABC, where you pass you fail one prong, you're done, you're an employee. We're going to give you 6 factors in a test, and you can pass some and fail some, and we're going to look at everything and figure it out. But what they did was they also added in explanations of how they plan to interpret each of the 6 factors. And it's in those interpretations that you hear all the lawyers and experts saying, well, hang on a minute, these have never been used this way before. It's kind of like if you had someone saying, okay, we're going to play a game with a baseball bat, and you're expecting them to swing the bat at the ball, and they instead start swinging it at people's heads. They're using the factors. They're saying they're going to interpret the factors in ways that are not historically the way they have been interpreted. And we can go one by one through these and talk about it. But at the end of the day, they're saying they're going to interpret these 6 factors in ways that this can misclassify legitimate independent contractors as employees. It's kind of like having a crooked umpire calling balls and strikes behind the plate. And because of who they are, you can see why that happened, right? They're trying to get as close as they can get to that California ABC test in a way that they think they will be able to survive what's inevitably going to be a giant battle in the courts.
Yeah. Yeah, to me, it almost feels like a placeholder. Like it's almost like the ABC test and how AB5 became AB2257, and they had to do all these other carve outs to get the group smaller, and who else can we whittle down? I feel like this is like the big net thrown out, and it's like, well, we'll just figure it out after the fact.
They definitely are no carve outs for sure in what they're doing here. And they definitely know they're going to get sued. So how many people will sue them, I don't know, but it's going to be more than one is.
So when I was looking at the process of a rule change, though, it normally takes a year or 2, right?
Well, by law, what we're in now is the public comment phase.
The 45 days.
So they have to accept public comments. If you go to federalregister.gov and you type in independent contractor, it's the first one that comes up. You click on it, you click through, you can file a public comment that says I'm for this or against this. That process has been completely overrun by spam and bots at this point. I counted the other day, one guy had submitted 10 comments, like a bot had submitted 10 comments in one guy's name. Like, it's a completely out of control spam fest where prior to that happening, there was about 2,100 comments. Most of them, the vast majority of them were people like us saying, hey, stop what you're doing. It was financial advisors, court reporters. I saw a few gig drivers in there, just people saying, stop, this is not okay with us. And then all of a sudden, one day, it just started to get overrun with this spam. And it's like it's operating on a loop where it's dumping 1,000 comments a day into the system. So we're now in that public comment phase. That will go on until they just extended it into December. It was supposed to end right after Thanksgiving. Now it's going to go on until December. And once that's over, by law, they have to read the comments. Now, I assume from what lawyers have explained to me, they're going to just throw away all the spammy stuff that there's, 7,000 of the same comment being just dumped into the system. So what we're encouraging people to do is write real comments and explain how this would actually affect them, because those they actually have to read and respond to. And it goes into the public record, and that all becomes fodder that can be used later in lawsuits. So it's important to participate in that process, even though these people are not on our team. They're going to do everything in their power to try to reclassify as many of us as they can. You want to give them a good fight, because you just might win, as we saw in the states and in the ProAct, right?
Right.
So after they do that, they have to give their response, and then they can implement the rule. Everything I've been told, everything I've seen is that is most likely to happen in the spring or summer of 2023. At which point they are immediately going to get sued. People have publicly said they're going to sue them. I know from private conversations, there's going to be multiple lawsuits filed against the U.S. Labor Department. Probably what happens at that point is at least one judge ties this thing up, puts a stay of some kind on it, and then lawyers fight for like a year or so. And